some of my favorite matches. I mean, of course, there's the Undertaker streak. There is
Yes.
there's Undertaker and Kane. The first time is one of my favorites. Actually, even without the Pete Rose thing in the beginning, I'll never understand why they did the Pete Rose thing. Kane's big feud with Pete Rose, where Pete Rose just basically showed up and got his ass kicked 4 years in a row. But okay, he just had this big feud with Kane. Kane tombstones Pete Rose every time. I guess he needed that to go back to the casino. I have no idea why or how that ever happened, but it did. But yeah, that feud I love to death. And that match, the build was just this amazing movie, like you said, of these two titans. Two big guys. There's the Undertaker, and then holy shit, there's his brother. The Undertaker has supernatural powers. Oh man, Kane has supernatural powers too.
Yeah.
And Kane's bigger. So this is terrifying. So, and he's the only one who can even stand up to the Undertaker and, actually give him a true run for his money. You might be able to beat the Undertaker, but Kane can actually, put him down.
Yeah. And
it's just this whole suspense of who's going to win, and the Undertaker's whole building up, I don't want to fight my brother, I can't fight my brother, and Kane's I'm a burn victim, and this is all your fault because you lit the fire that created me. So, and I looked up to you, and now I'm back and now I've realized you're no good. So I'm gonna take it. So I'm gonna take it out. And Kane is a sympathetic character, and you can get behind as to why he's so twisted, from his perspective, in his mind and in a lot of the story, he did nothing wrong. He's just a victim of the situation. And the Undertaker is also he's partially, he's still very remorseful, but he also, he doesn't want to fight his brother. He's just remorseful and he feels terrible. Yeah. But Kane's also Kane's also right, because the Undertaker didn't talk about him. So he's where were you all these years? I needed you. Where were you? So you can understand the Undertaker made his mistakes too, and he kind of doesn't want to face him.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to face his mistakes, so they're both flawed characters in their own right. And the whole they're being brought to get, and they're what's bringing them together is Paul Bearer, who is not only the Undertaker's former manager, but he's also, this part I think it gets a little ridiculous, but he's also the illegitimate father of Kane.
Yes.
So that part I think is a little too goofy, but everything else up to that point is just amazing. And the match itself is just this total back and forth, and Kane kicks out of the Undertaker's tombstone, and this was the first time anybody did that. And then Kane gives the Undertaker his own tombstone, and then they go back and forth, and the Undertaker, he has to do 2 regular tombstones, and the third one is on and then I think, he gives him 3 tombstones, and he beats Kane, and he doesn't even have a second to celebrate, and Kane sits up like Michael Myers, and Kane gets it, and Paul Bearer throws a chair in the ring, and Kane tombstones the Undertaker on the chair. So it's oh my god, he beat him, but this is far from over, and it's just, and it's a good 30-minute match, 45 if you include the 45 if you include the entrances and the and the build promo, and that's one of my favorites. Stone Cold versus Bret Hart. I hadn't seen that up until a year ago. For whatever reason, that match always escaped me. And I finally sat down and I said, you know what, this was at the start of the pandemic, so it was on my birthday, so I was we're totally quarantined like the rest of the world. If you don't mind, my lady, I was talking to my girlfriend, I was if you don't mind, my lady, I would like to watch a bunch of wrestling matches after breakfast. And she was well, it's your birthday, and the world has nothing better to do, so I guess so. She fell asleep anyway, but so she was I don't care, I got a nap in. But that match is amazing, and that match really made Stone Cold. They did the double turn, which even now, that's like one of the few things that's still sacred in wrestling is the double turn. Because nobody sees that coming, and it almost never happens. It happens maybe once every like 5-ish years, 5 to 6 years, maybe even more, you'll see a double turn, but usually never happens. And Stone Cold is just freaking bleeding like a stuck pig. I love those calls that JR has, but like,
Yeah.
still, but I mean, he didn't call that match. I don't think.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think. I think he became like a color commentator later that year after Vince went off the air.
Vince was on. Oh no, Jim Ross was a commentator at that WrestleMania, but Vince might have been calling that match.
Vince may have been calling that as well. I don't know. I think it was Vince and King at that point was the announcer team.
According to the Wikipedia article,
maybe Jim Ross was like the
Jim Ross was there. Maybe he was doing interviews.
Yeah, I think that's what he had been doing at first. As far as his on-air stuff goes, and I think they brought him in to do commentary.
Yeah,
like more when Vince McMahon wanted to, like when the secret was out that he was the owner the whole time and he was being Mr. McMahon, and like because he couldn't be the announcer anymore, he had to be an on-air personality. So I think that's when they made the big switch. And but God, on Stone Cold, he bleeds and he bleeds and he bleeds, and you have that iconic shot, and this is why blood is so important in pro wrestling.
Yeah.
Because like you don't need to do it frequently and you don't need to do it often, but the few times that you do it, it will matter. You have to make it matter, and it has to, and it will make it can make a bad match a really good match. Like it can turn a bad match into a good match, and it can turn a good match into a great match.
Yeah.
And that's something that happened here. This was already a very good match. This pushed it over the edge to being a spectacular match. And you have that iconic shot where Stone Cold passes out. And it was an I Quit submission match, which is a weird stipulation because Stone Cold doesn't have any submission holds. He never did. He had the $1 Million Dream, but like that wasn't really his move. Like that's just what they gave him because they didn't really know what to do with him, and he was the ringmaster and whatever. And then he eventually broke out into his own, which that's another thing that doesn't really happen too much because of the overproduction and the scripted promos and all that nonsense. And he ends up passing out from the pain, and there's the shot where he's bleeding everywhere, and the blood goes into the mouth and over the tooth, and he's screaming, and he just passes out. And in his eyes, in everybody's eyes watching, this man just became a friggin' treasure because he was so damn tough that he wasn't gonna let the other guy win. He was just gonna, like, if he was gonna let the other guy win, he wasn't gonna give him the satisfaction of watching him submit. He was just gonna pass out and that's it. Like he'd rather go unconscious. Like he just basically had that look like I'd rather die than lose to you.
Yeah.
And it was like that's a spectacular one. Any Stone Cold versus The Rock match is just amazing.
Well, iconic.
There was nothing. Yes, iconic is truly the word. I mean, there's nothing better than that. But I rewatched this the other day too. I mean, there's also the career versus streak matches. Those are unbelievable. And even even to finish that thought where you were going earlier is, that like the build of those two matches were great, and they stemmed from the Ric Flair match. And it was just incredible. And you had, for the first one was just, Mr. WrestleMania versus the Undertaker versus the Streak, and it was like, okay, this is really cool. This is really great. This is gonna go. And the first match was a classic, and the second one was better because they polished everything. Mm-hmm. Like the second match was much cleaner. Yeah. And like the first match, there are some scary spots. Like there's some things where Shawn Michaels doesn't miss where he misses the moonsault, or he's a little too far or whatever. Mm-hmm. And he catches himself on the table, and the table doesn't quite break the way that it should. But there's also that really scary thing where the Undertaker dives off the top rope. He does that like cat dive where he goes over the rope, and he gets caught on the top ropes just slightly, like his toe gets caught up, and he goes straight down, and Shawn Michaels like throws the cameraman in his face so that he can break the fall, because if he didn't do that, like the Undertaker like scorpions almost, and he hits his head right on the concrete, and he probably like jammed up his neck really bad there.
Yeah.
But if that cameraman didn't get shoved in his face and like try to like stop it a little bit or cushion it in some way, he might have died right there.
Yeah.
So there were a few scary spots in the first one, and the second one, it's just Shawn Michaels wants to have the Ric Flair treatment and retire too. And he wants to fight the Undertaker, and he wants to beat him. He's like, I got sloppy last time, I got overconfident. I want to beat you. Like this, I know I can beat you. And the Undertaker's like, no, we already had a match. I beat you. Stop crying. Like, we're done. Mm-hmm. And Shawn Michaels is like, no. So he costs the Undertaker the championship belt at Elimination Chamber. And I think that Elimination Chamber match, I don't know if it's that one, but there's one Elimination Chamber where the Undertaker, his pyro goes, like the pyro guy messes up, or there's something wrong with the pyro in his entrance, and it like burns he gets like second and third degree burns on his chest, like his whole front gets lit up like a Christmas tree, and he has to do the whole match. He has to go out and do the match now, and he's like, whole body is on fire, basically. So he like, so like the camera wouldn't cut away to him when he's in the Elimination Chamber cage, like when he's in the little cell. Mm-hmm. He's like dousing himself with water the whole time.
Yeah. Well, it's like, I think it was a WrestleMania that Triple H got like secondary burns from the. It wasn't pyro though. It was the fog machine or whatever sprayed like, not like, I guess like dry ice on his stomach, and he ended up getting like secondary burns from that, and had to wrestle the whole match with like secondary burns.
That sucks. Yeah. But the things we do, we do to entertain people, and then once it's easier to do the match but like the thing is, once that adrenaline wears off and you're in the back, you are in pain.
Yes. Yeah.
But anyway, so Shawn Michaels super kicks the Undertaker and screws him out of his championship belt, and now he's really pissed. So he's like, I'm not gonna do it. And he's like, all right. Well, he's like, I've cost you the belt. He's like, He's like, fine. If you don't do this, then how about I make it even more interesting? What else can I do to get you to fight me? How about I put my career on the line if you're so confident that you beat me once and you can't, like, it doesn't matter. If it really doesn't matter, then I'll put my career on the line and you can retire me. How about that? And he's like, okay, fine. He does it. And then you have that, he hesitates too. They have that whole classic match, and then the Undertaker hesitates at the end too. He's got him beat. And he doesn't want to do it. And then Shawn Michaels is like, you son of a bitch, you better do it. And he slaps him, and he picks him up, and he tombstones him, and he does the big spike one too. And that's the end of the show. And then he leaves it for Shawn Michaels too.
Yeah.
And that would have been great if Saudi Arabia didn't happen, and then all the money ruined everything.
Yeah.
Shawn Michaels came out of retirement for the worst match, and we'll just pretend that it didn't happen. I've never watched it. I'm not going to. Mm-hmm. And Shawn Michaels has now even said if he knew, after watching The Undertaker's documentary, if he knew that The Undertaker wanted to do this to try to, have his last match to go out on that was good, he would have never done it. But whatever, it happened. What else do we have here? Oh yes, and I don't know, but I was watching this the other night. You also have Savage versus Steamboat, which is a classic in itself. Andre the Giant and Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan versus Macho Man was great. When the Mega Powers collide, I loved that.
Yeah. I mean, Andre the Giant versus Hogan is probably the definitive WrestleMania match.
Yeah.
What was it, WrestleMania 3 when he picked up Andre the Giant and nobody had done anything close to that before.
No.
And Hogan, that was when Hogan was on top of the world. He was the number one wrestler. Every kid was a Hulkamaniac, and they saw him do this ridiculous feat of strength, picking up Andre the Giant, who was 500-600 pounds, and body slamming him.
God. I mean, you can't talk about WrestleMania without talking about Andre the Giant. Or Hulk Hogan, and they were just so freaking pivotal. To the business.
And Macho Man,
Yeah, and Macho Man too. He was a treasure too. I honestly really liked when it was him versus Hulk Hogan, and he went bad, and he was the Macho King, and he had Sherry Martel, and then at the end, Hulk Hogan beats him, but then you have that moment with Macho Man and Elizabeth, and it's like, oh, will they or won't they? Are they going to get back together now that has he seen the error of his ways? And they do, and that and their embrace is better than the match itself in some ways, where it's that's the payoff that everybody wanted. Yes, they wanted the match to happen, and yes, they wanted the two to fight, and yes, they put on a classic, but they really wanted to see if things were going to be okay with him and Elizabeth. And that was really cool too. But there's also WrestleMania 10, where it's Bret Hart versus Owen Hart. The whole Yokozuna match was what it was. It was as good as it could have been when Bret wins the belt, and I thought that was also really cool. But WrestleMania 10, it has Bret. The opening match is Bret versus Owen, and I wish that there were more Bret versus Owen matches. To watch, I could never get tired of that. They had an absolute chess match, and oh god, it was just so damn good.
Yeah,
I wish Owen Hart were still with us today.
Yeah,
and I wish that Bret Hart had never gotten sent into early retirement from the concussion.
Yeah,
who knows what other matches he would have had later on in his career. But it is what it is. We also have the ladder match, the first WrestleMania ladder match, Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon, which great match. Awesome and a classic. Bret Hart in the book claims that Shawn Michaels stole the idea from him because him and Shawn Michaels were supposed to do the ladder match, and then Shawn pitched it to Vince later on, and then Vince said okay, possible, don't know. I mean, Bret. In the book, Bret accuses a lot of people of stealing ideas from him and whatever. So, it's a wrestling book. I have to take it with a grain of salt. He takes himself very, very, very seriously, almost too seriously, I would say, in the book.
Yeah.
Where everything he does is justified and noble, and he's never wrong and all this stuff. His book is very bitter.
And we discussed it previously on a different episode. We discussed Bret Hart's, kind of his thoughts.
Right. That's why I'm trying to shorten it up so that I don't get on a tangent.
And it's it's stupid because now Shawn and Bret are pretty much over it. They're on fairly good terms now. They've had interviews, the two of them together.
Yeah.
I think Bret now blames Vince more for that whole situation.
I think he does.
Shawn. So, whatever. It's, we talked about this before. Bret, he has a reason to be bitter, but at the same time, he kind of let that bitterness, rule his life. He could have, a lot of people, they always say the best revenge is to live well, and, instead he just dwelled on it.
Yeah. Yeah, so as I was getting to, I was watching this the other night. Well, I was watching. I had a bad week or like a bad day really, and I was just not in the best mood, and I was not the nicest guy to be around. I was kind of a jerk, and I felt really bad about it. And my girlfriend, as sweet as she could be, and as wonderful as she is, she goes, "Listen, I'm sorry you had a bad day. Why don't you take a bath, listen to some music, have a drink? I'm going to bed, and you should watch a wrestling match tonight. Before you go to bed, you should watch a wrestling match." And I said, "Okay, thank you for understanding. I love you. I'm sorry." And then I super kicked her. No. No, I could never do that. Honestly, she's pretty smart. She'd probably duck and super kick me. No, so I was watching this the other night, and this match always gives me goosebumps. I don't know. I think it might be my favorite WrestleMania match. It's The Rock versus Hulk Hogan.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that was a long time coming. Pretty much.
It's amazing that it happened.
The top of each of their respective generations. It's lucky that it happened because Hogan was older obviously at that point. He could have easily had an injury that ended his career like before that. So it's lucky that it happened. And it's also surprising that they each of them were able to put their egos to the side and kind of like put on a good match because both of them were probably like, well, no, I want to win.
I think The Rock was a little. I think The Rock was just kind of more open to whatever. I think having grown up in the business and like understanding how Hulk Hogan was, he was probably like, all right. Like his original thought was probably like, all right, he's probably gonna have Hulk Hogan win. Like, I don't care, whatever. It's an honor to share the ring with him because The Rock is a gracious guy. And
yeah, but at that time, The Rock was kind of.
But The Rock was at his. But The Rock was at his peak. Oh, I'm sure he had an ego. Are you kidding me? He was at the guy was at the top of his game. Why wouldn't you?
And, I mean, because you look at like that match between Shawn Michaels and Hogan, and like Hogan refused to do the job to Shawn Michaels. So
well, they were also supposed. Well, they were also supposed to have a trilogy.
Yeah.
They were supposed to have a trilogy, and Hogan was supposed to, and like I think Michaels was supposed to win the trilogy. Like Hogan was supposed to win the first one, and then Michaels was supposed to win the next two. And Hogan, like, he didn't want to lose the feud. He wanted to have the W over Shawn Michaels. So he made up a bunch of crap. He was like, "Oh, my back's hurting. Oh, I don't know. I don't think I can do this. Oh, I don't know. I might have to get surgery. I've got to check on this. I got to get it checked out. I don't think I can do the other two matches. I'm sorry, man. Thanks." And Shawn Michaels was like, "Oh, I see how it is." So he like completely sabotaged him in one of like the worst selling in the world, just to make Hogan look bad. Oh, it's one of
the most hilarious wrestling matches ever.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you say, "This is the equivalent of somebody somebody rebelling when their parents tell them that they can't have the cookies."
Pretty much.
Like, this is essentially the kid going to the store and buying all of the cookies and then eating them in front of their parents while throwing dinner out the window. But Hogan and the Rock, this was not that. Instead, it's like the interesting thing is that Hogan is the heel the entire time, and I was explaining this to my girlfriend, and I was like, the build of this match, you would not know who the bad. You would not know. You wouldn't think that Hogan was the bad guy in this one, and she was like, "Well, what do you mean?" I was like, "Okay." Hogan and his faction, the NWO, invaded WWE. Vince McMahon sent them in to kill his creation, which he may be doing right now in the real world in real time. And they beat the tar out of all of the top good guys for weeks. And Hulk, and a couple of weeks before this, possibly even the week before this, Hulk Hogan beat The Rock so bad that he had to go in an ambulance, and then Hogan took a Mack truck and he rammed it into the ambulance. Now, The Rock did not die of his injuries or go to the hospital and stay there for at least a week. Instead, The Rock was back the next night to have this and he was somehow able to put on this clinic. And she was like, "Okay, she's like, I understand not to question you, but this is really something to question logically." And I was like, "Don't do it, you'll hurt yourself." Yeah. Don't ever try to question the logic of wrestling. You will hurt yourself.
Well, you have to see wrestlers as superheroes, because that's essentially what they are.
Yeah, essentially. And like just this whole match is just incredible, and they barely did anything. That's what it took away from me. I was like, this is so great, and the whole time they're just milking the crowd and they're reading the crowd. So and they switched because they caught the energy, and right before it, while everything in the audience is palpitating and it's building, and you can hear the crowd's excitement, they do nothing. For the first 2 minutes of the match, they just stare each other down, and they don't even touch. And the minute that they lock up, they just do the standard test of strength, collar and elbow tie up, and everyone is out of their chairs, screaming. And then the Rock starts working as a heel, and they totally switch. They didn't do a double turn, but the fans turned Hogan babyface that night, and they turned The Rock heel just for the match. They were like, we love The Rock, but we can't cheer him. It's Hulk Hogan.
Yeah.
They were like, we could cheer The Rock if he's fighting anyone else, but we can't cheer him against Hulk Hogan. This could be Hulk Hogan's last match, and I think that's what they were viewing it as, is this is potentially his last match.
Yeah.
And they barely did anything. They barely did anything super physical at that during the match at all. Mm-hmm. And
I think that's
you don't have. Well, no, it wasn't even that it had to be that. It was like I look at that and I say, this is all you have to do. You don't have to. This is what wrestling could be. You don't have to. You don't have to do. You don't have to do all of your moves to the other guy. You don't have to do each other's finishes 30 different times and kick out of them 29 of them. You don't have to you don't have to throw in all the weapons. You don't have to do all the run-ins. You don't have to do all these super physical moves and 300 backflips and a freaking double elbow credenza or whatever it is. You don't have to do arm bars 36 times. You don't have to do like a 305 mile an hour stunt show, car accident in order to get the audience pumped up. If you can keep it as simple as you can, do it. Just build. All it is just building and reading the crowd. Yeah, and that's all that they did.
That's what I mean by if they did it as this crazy spot fest and weapons and all this, it would not have been that good of a match.
No, we wouldn't be talking about it in this light. We would be saying, man, I wish they did something else. But they did. That match was as perfect as a match can possibly be. Mm-hmm. I think that might be... That's probably why this is my favorite WrestleMania match. And it's definitely one of my favorite matches of all time. Mm-hmm. And it's also the story that they told was just the young lion versus the old lion, and it was like, is he gonna take over the pride? Yeah. Is he gonna or is the old one gonna have one last fight in him, and is he gonna be able to subdue the young lion? We don't know. And it was just one of those. There was magic that they caught in that moment that they will never replicate, and I'm glad that it's I'm glad that it's immortalized on home video for everybody.
Yeah.
Or digital media device land for everyone. Unless the Cockmasters find something wrong with it and shut it down.
Well, I was going to say the Cockmasters are going to take it out because Hogan is, come out as, has said racist things in the past. So now the Cockmasters can't have that on their network.
Oh, so God, no.
Hogan's deleted.
Oh, here we go. But then that would...
They'll just blur out Hogan. It'll be like The Rock versus, a giant blur.
Oh, my God. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody just did that as a parody and they uploaded it just as like The Rock versus Hogan Peacock edition.
Yeah, it was was it WWE 2K15 or 16 where it had the classic feuds thing where you could go back and so they had the Shawn Michaels versus Triple H rivalry from the Attitude Era up to the Ruthless Aggression Era, and it's they just happened to skip over WrestleMania 20. It's yeah, so there was all these matches that Shawn Michaels and Triple H had, this huge rivalry, and in 2004 they kind of just they weren't there, and then they went back to it after that. It's
yeah, you can't do that. You can't have again, scene missing. You can't do that.
Exactly.
How great would it have been if they just put that in the game? If it just said WrestleMania 21 and then there was just a thing that said scene missing.
Yeah. Or it's they just replace Benoit with it's
vacant with vacant.
Yeah, or it's a generic looking wrestler that says the Crippler or something like that.
No,
yeah, remember the Crippler?
No, vacant. It's Vacant's time to shine.
Vacant.
Yeah, great match with Vacant. Yeah, Vacant put on a clinic. I mean, there's not really enough respect for Vacant. No, I don't think anyone's... Vacant's held every single title.
Yeah.
In every single promotion. No one is as... There's no superstar as decorated as Vacant.
In the history of professional wrestling.
Yes. And Vacant is the oldest living wrestler.
Yeah. He wrestled in every era of wrestling.
Yes. Vacant is... WrestleMania may be the showcase of the Immortals, but Vacant is the Immortals. So WrestleMania is a showcase of Vacant by that logic.
Yeah.
So so WrestleMania, it's a show about vacancies and who will fill them from the time for the end of time. Also, The Rock versus Hulk Hogan is good. But yeah, that match is everything is perfect about that match.
Mm-hmm.
Even well, maybe not everything. The run-in with the NWO was but the two of them work together to beat them, and that officially turns Hogan babyface. Mm-hmm. So while maybe that part they didn't quite need, it works with it.
Well, I think Hogan kind of needed it to kind of go back into his old persona of Hulk Hogan with the yellow and the red.
Yeah.
The classic Hogan persona. He kind of needed to break away from the NWO, and so he could drop the Hollywood thing and go back to his classic.
Well, also, I don't know if Vince really had long-term plans with that, and Kevin Nash was injured anyway.
Mm-hmm.
The NWO in itself just kind of imploded because Scott Hall relapsed and started drinking again, and he was fired shortly after, and then Kevin Nash he tore his quad walking across the ring because he just stepped wrong.
Like Vince McMahon.
Yeah.
Both quads just getting into the ring.
God. Yeah. I mean, it happens.
Yeah.
It happens when you're putting that much stress on your body and you're working out and doing steroids back in the day. Maybe he wasn't doing steroids anymore at that time, but he was in his late 30s, early 40s. He may have done steroids at one point in his time, possibly into that quad. So, maybe he worked it out a little too hard that day, or maybe he tore. Maybe the tears had started from the workout, and
I would imagine it would have had to have started, and then he just kind of stepped wrong, and that stepping wrong just kind of like exasperated it and made it like tear off completely.
Yeah. I mean, I would say if you're gonna work out and you're a pro wrestler, you like on the days where where it's like a taping day or if it's show day, I would imagine you do the light workout on that day.
Yeah.
Where like you're not really going hard, you're just doing a maintenance check that day, essentially. And then like the following day when you're like, or like the following, several days when you're not on TV, that's when you put in the big work. Mm-hmm. But I don't know, or maybe he was trying to do a catch-up day. I don't know. There's a number of things that it could have been.
Yeah.
Or it just could have been his age. I don't know.
It could have been the injury that was developing over time, then it just happened to, like, that was, like, the final straw, just the stepping weird. I mean, like, how many times does, you're walking down the street and you step weird and you roll your ankle or you friggin', like, all of a sudden get a cramp that, like, I was, like, the other night I was stepping into the shower and my back just spasmed all of a sudden because of the way I stepped. I stepped weird. Like, and it took like 10 minutes for the spasming to stop.
Yeah.
Like, so it's you never know. You just step weird and stretch something wrong and that's it.
George Soros used to base his investment decisions on his back spasms sometimes.
Are you serious?
I'm deadly serious. I think it's in the book More Money Than God, which is about hedge funds, and it's like the history of hedge funds basically. Yeah. And like I've also read this in an interview too, but like his son, I forgot what his son's name is, George Soros, but his other son that also has like he has his own hedge fund. He like somebody asked him like what the secret to his dad, like what his dad's like. What his dad's success was to investing, or like what he would like base his investment decisions on. He's like, honestly, I have no idea. But if my dad made a decision, it usually was a result of his back spasms.
Wow, that's.
I don't know. He must have been He must be very superstitious.
Yeah.
Or like it could be one of those things where like, if somebody, how when like somebody has like surgery, how like. And how like certain surgeries they can tell if the weather's gonna like what the weather's gonna be like, because like they get this like they either get like a chill or they get like a sensation that in the part of their body that had the surgery where like it only does that just before it like rains or whatever, like let's just say. And like I guess it's one of those things where like if he had a back spasm, like something like he just decided to like get rid of something, or like he decided to buy something, whether or not he had, I don't know. But his major things apparently happened as a result of back spasms. I don't know. But I mean, it could have been a number of reasons how and why he, why Kevin Nash had like wrecked his quad. But I mean, we do not know. Also, like the year before that, like was when Vince bought WCW, and like they chose not to just go work for WWE right away. Yeah. Because like they had the guaranteed contract, so they sat at home for a year and they collected like $500K or whatever it was. Like they collected stupid money just to sit home, and which ruined the invasion storyline. But that's another topic for another day. Mm-hmm. And it could have been just rust. He could have just been rusty and. Yeah. Like his body going from, not wrestling for a year to suddenly wrestling again, that's like a huge change for your conditioning. And, his body may not have been able to handle like that, like the work at so early on. So I don't know. But again, The Rock Hogan, perfect match. As simple as it could be. Gave everybody what they wanted. The Rock also, like, he celebrates a little bit because Hogan gives it to him, but then he's like, and he's like, no, this is your time, man. Like, go pose. The people came here. They want to see you pose. They want to see you do the big thing. They want to see you celebrate. And Hogan's also like, they're going back and forth where Hogan's like, yeah, but you won. Don't worry about it. I'm old. They don't want to. He's like, oh, come on, just do it. Everybody wants to see this. Just do it. And like, he did. So he poses, and it's a big thing, and it's great. But it's just so cool. Like that match, there's nothing else that I can say about it. It's so cool, and I'm glad that it happened. But to go back to what you said before of how like The Rock, how like Hogan still could have been classic Hogan at that point, and he could have been politicking and doing all this stuff. Mm-hmm. That's why Stone Cold didn't want to do the match, because it was originally pitched as Stone Cold versus Hulk Hogan, and Austin didn't want to do it because he didn't feel comfortable with the finish, because he didn't know what Hogan was going to do. So he had decided, he kind of just decided, no, there was like some kind of bad juju about this mentally, so I don't want to do the match.
Yeah.
So they gave it to The Rock. Or maybe he even like suggested just give it to just if anyone's going to do the match that's not me, then give it to The Rock. It's either going to be me or Rocky. Give it to Rock. Mm-hmm. And then Stone Cold went to have a match with Scott Hall that Stone Cold hated because I think Scott Hall was drunk during the match.
Yeah.
And it was what it was, a 10-minute match. Boom, boom, stunner, done, nothing impactful. And then the Rock and Hogan go on to put on the perfect match. I mean, Stone Cold has said now, hindsight being 2020, the payday would have been great. I should have done it for the money, but I'm glad that. But then we wouldn't have gotten that match, and that match was better than anything I probably could have done. Mm-hmm. And who could forget the TLC matches too? And like any ladder match at WrestleMania was a classic, and the TLC. Oh, yeah. Even that has its own pay-per-view now.
Which, yeah.
But that tag rivalry between the Hardys, Edge and Christian, and the Dudleys, there's nothing bad that you could say about that feud.
That's definitely one of my favorites too.
Yeah, TLC 1 or TLC 2? Well, the first one is a regular ladder match, and then TLC...
Yeah, the TLC match.
Yeah. Because I think the first TLC was at SummerSlam, and then TLC 2 was the one at WrestleMania. Mm-hmm. Yeah, those matches are ridiculous too, and
yeah,
there's a JR story where, like, I mean, this happened a lot of times where, like, if a guy felt that they weren't getting paid enough for what they did, JR would basically just ask, how many zeros do I have to add to the check to make it go away? And this was one of those situations because, like, I think it was after TLC 2, like, they got their check and Bubba got, and, like, all of them, they were, like, about it, but nobody wanted to say anything. Mm-hmm. And, like, Bubba Ray got, like, pissed off about it. And he was like, you freaking kidding me? No, I'm going to say something. And they were like, no, don't do it. He was like, no, that's bullshit. We just went through tables. We threw ourselves off ladders. We almost killed ourselves for these people for a half hour. Are you out of your damn mind? No. So he went and he was like, and, like, I don't know if he went with somebody else and they were trying to, like, say it in a nice way and he just flat out went and said it. But he just, like, went to JR and he was like, JR, this is effing BS. Like, I'm not going to do, like, what the hell happened? We, like, do you not think that we did a good job? And he was like, all right, let me get the checkbook out. I'll write you a new check. I hope they got every cent that they deserved. I hope that they did, and I hope that they didn't spend it all in one place. Unless it was, on a new house, then I guess you don't really have a choice.